can bring her in then. But thank you everybody for joining this month's HIRANI Fireside Chat. We have hopefully 5 panelists joining us today, and I'll quickly introduce them myself in a second before we get into the guts of the discussions. But very interested today to be discussing healthy aging. I think for as someone who spent their career trying to develop cures for diseases, it's a wonderful challenge to have to manage an aging population. It's really what we strive to deal with as a population that's aging healthily, and how to manage that is a great problem to have. Stuart's telling me my voice is broken. I'm not sure how to fix my voice. It's kind of dependent on my.
It's more of a little bit of an echo. I don't know if others are hearing that. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. George is giving the thumbs up. Not entirely sure how to fix that.
Yes, maybe if we make sure everyone's got their microphones off.
Yeah, could I ask everyone, good call, Stuart, everyone to mute if they're not on the panel. I see Helen's joined us. That's great. Hi, Helen.
Hi, everyone. Apologies for being a little bit late. Just trying to catch up with the technology.
Not at all. Guys, is my voice any clearer now?
Very clear.
Okay, great. Well, I'll continue then. As I was saying, aging, having the problem of managing an aging society in a healthy state is a great problem to have, and so that in itself has found its way onto the agendas of policymakers and folks issuing funds across the globe, which is great, especially in developed populations. And so I think it's germane to have this discussion today, as there are a number of different opportunities emerging, and I think we're well placed in the panel to cover these. Speaking of the panel, we have quite a diverse group today. We've got representation from QUB, from Stuart Elborn, who's the PVC at the School of Medicine, Dentistry and Biomedical Sciences at QUB. We've got Helene McNulty, who's a professor from Ulster University in the School of Biomedical Sciences, and I know Helen's particular interest is nutrition and healthy aging, so that will bring a particular angle to the discussion. Julie, welcome. Julie Taylor's from Department of International Trade. She's the Aging Society Specialist, so that will bring us an interesting perspective on how trade fits into the discussion. George MacGinnis joins us from UKRI. He's the Challenge Director for Healthy Aging. So I would be interested to hear George's perspective on the national funding situation for healthy aging. And then finally, Joann Rhodes joins us, who will succeed me as CEO of HIRANI in the coming months. So it's a great pleasure to have Joann on the panel. Many of you will have met or will be aware of Joann. Joann has a career in the pharmaceutical industry, but is heavily involved in academic lab aging. Without further ado, having set that scene, I'll ask actually Joann to just expand a little bit on that, and just further that scene setting, and talk a little bit about how healthy aging and industrial strategy and what the civic opportunity might be as we look at this challenge. As a focus for innovation and opportunity.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Rob, and thanks for the lovely introduction as well. Yeah, I think you've set the bar high for HIRANI, so I'm going to have a big challenge. Anyway, yeah. So if I'd like to start really from how I got interested in healthy aging. So as Rob said, I'm a pharmacologist by training, so started off in the pharmaceutical industry, and I thought I was discovering drugs to fix diseases and chronic diseases, so cardiovascular disease, respiratory, and Alzheimer's, and using patient cells to study the disease. But really, it became apparent sort of 10, 15 years in that there's this underlying basis to disease, and particularly in respiratory disease, which I was studying at Imperial College at the National Heart and Lung Institute, we were looking at accelerated aging of the lung. And so really got me thinking about healthy aging and or aging, and how we could think about addressing that. Was it going to be a therapy that we were looking at? And actually, as I've increased my career with strategic alliances and thinking about academic industrial research, I sort of become to realise that actually the burden is so high. So those aged 65 years utilise 70% of the healthcare resources, and I think developing just a new drug in isolation for dementia or for cardiovascular disease isn't going to fix that problem. So it really broadened out my view. And I think with COVID as well, there's increasing urgency in tackling this, because COVID has obviously impacted the ageing population more broadly. But I think although COVID has been hugely impactful, there's a silver lining to that, because we've uncovered that people are prepared to accept one of the biggest recessions in history, in 300 years, because they've prioritised health and well-being over the economy somewhat. So I think that sort of is a very positive message, sends a positive message. So really what I've begun to understand as I've moved out from drug discovery is not only am I impatient and drug discovery and development's too slow, is that it's about the patient and that people want to live their lives. They're interested in just getting on with living their lives, and there tends to be a focus on that the NHS should be treating their diseases, and that's where they go for their healthcare. And I'd really like to see a shift, and I think that it's important to get a shift whereby people are much more empowered to look after their own health. And I think with the diseases of aging, and I'm sure that the other panelists will bring in their knowledge, is actually aging, the accelerated aging is due to environmental factors. I think 2 decades ago we thought genetics was going to solve everything, but now it's very much apparent that it's a mixture of the environment and our own lifestyles. Have I lost you all? No. Oh, sorry, everything froze up. Sorry. So really, I've really become interested in thinking about how we can, what the benefits are of keeping a healthier ageing population. I've become involved with the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Longevity, which I know definitely George is a member of that, obviously, and really would like to bring in the longevity dividend. So the longevity dividend is really the thought that older patients can actually provide a significant economic and societal benefit through them as consumers, as well as in the community and volunteers looking after other children or their grandchildren, etc. And actually empowering them to stay in their jobs for longer and become independent. So I think the opportunity really is to broaden out the view from healthcare and actually think about promoting people to look after their own well-being and to eat right and not smoke and do exercise. The problem is we all know how that works. We all know that what we should do. And actually, for me, the biggest challenge is getting people to involve that in their lives. So that for me brings together a lot of different sectors. So there's the digital health sector and precision medicine and also societal factors to really empower people to look after their own well-being. And I think really what's exciting just at the crux now is that it's an opportunity to bring together that science, technology and social and corporate sector really, and draw it together in a national strategy for longevity. And the All-Party Parliamentary Group, I think some of you may well know, their aim is to increase healthy life expectancy by 5 years. By 2035, which I think is a tall ask, but I think there's a huge opportunity now as the focus after COVID is on healthcare to really deliver that and use the patient as a stakeholder in their own health. And I think that will bring to the fore in the coming months.
And thanks, Joann. I think you're right. I think the game has changed, and I'm really interested in this concept of the longevity dividend. We might pick that in a while. George, given that scene that has been set there, from a UK policy funding perspective, as you sit in UKRI, where do you see the opportunities here from your perspective?
So, well, firstly, I'm really glad that Joann mentioned the 5 extra years of healthy, independent life. That's not just anchored in an industrial strategy, and strategies can come and go, but it's been reaffirmed in the current UK government manifesto. It's just been reaffirmed in the UK R&D roadmap. So we expect it to feature. Strategically, we sort of sit somewhere between trying to solve the front door crisis of the NHS and what Michael Marmot would advocate in terms of early years intervention. And I think that 2035 is a really interesting, challenging target, because it's unlikely that we're really going to develop new drugs and get them through trials and get them through nice approvals in that sort of time frame. So it sort of points to the scale of societal change needed. And Joann talked about some of the digital interventions, what you can do for yourself. I think there are 2 sides to what we're really interested in, which is one is what are the services and products that people would actually want to have to enable them to remain more active, productive and socially connected. But also, what are the societal interventions, the environment, the built environment, in your homes, in your communities, that enable people as they age to remain active and connected to their communities. So quite a really broad landscape, and Joann hinted to it. So because we fund a massive amount of research, there are bits of UKRI that are funding the biological science, the medical aspects, the emerging novel technologies like care robotics. But what we're really interested in is, how do you make that impact by 2035? So unless you're thinking about impacting the lives of millions of people within a decade, we're probably in the wrong space. And we're not going to do that by diverting public service money from the NHS or the we'll all recognise the underfunding challenges of social care. So how do you get people wanting to invest in their own well-being? And when I talked about environment, actually that extends to how do you get employers thinking about what is it to allow people to remain active in the workforce for longer? What are their health needs? What are their workspace needs? Are they all focused on making millennials happy and attracting young graduates, or are we actually recognising the sort of intellectual capacity that they bring? So the opportunities, and that's sort of where the industrial strategy fits in, and specifically where the sort of healthy aging challenge that I look at. So we're looking at taking innovations to scale. We've got something already out, and our main investments in a project called Trailblazers are proceeding. But there's lots of other stuff that is a current opportunity. So we're really interested in developing novel services and products. So recognizing that there isn't a mature, a set of mature innovations that you can just take to scale, we need to seed a pipeline of continuous innovation. So we've recently signed agreements with 3 private investors in an investment partnership. Together, we're releasing currently 26 million into the market, and by over the next 3 years, we expect that to ramp up to a total of about 58 million of investment, split between grant and equity for small and medium-sized companies to apply for. And actually, the route that we're going is that the investors are the front door, and they will work out whether something's investable, and then ask us, is this a project in scope of healthy aging, and go. And we're just actually tightening up our process, so actually that should look like a pretty joined up joint decision making to get investment flowing. And having literally launched our first sort of competition, as we'll have to call it, for referrals in, we're already actively talking to 4 companies. I would expect we're going to make, I don't know, 60 to 80 investments over that period. Some small, some much more in a sort of 1 to 2 million size to go. So opportunities for business. but also there's opportunities for research to make an impact. And I think what's really interesting here is actually the emphasis on translation. So our main research call has just recently closed. We've had a fabulous response, including from Northern Ireland. So I'm delighted to have made those inroads. It is highly competitive. So I don't know what the result will be. But Judith Phillips from Stirling University is leading, has been appointed as our research director, leading that, and really keen to see the engagement with businesses. So research having an impact and really making a difference in product design, but also, as I alluded to earlier, aspects of the built environment and others, so that this becomes a focus for competitiveness of UK-based companies working in this market and able to use that to exploit opportunities internationally, because this is an international thing. And the final thing I would flag is that we're just coming to this final sort of selection of the first of 3 annual rounds of early stage innovation competitions, where we're looking for researchers with really innovative ideas that may result in a business, or may actually result in a better fleshed out proposal for further research. What's significant is that we're reaching into social and behavioural sciences and design, as well as STEM subjects, and really keen to emphasise that actually that behavioural understanding is really important for the market. The opportunity is that round 2 will open for applications in January. We'd certainly like people to start warming up as they're thinking about what they're doing in the following academic year, and we'll be looking forward to that. I can't tell you who, but I'm really excited that we've appointed a support partner to actually run that a support program, intensive support for those innovators, similar in nature to some other programs, but a very strong social science translation capability. So not just giving you some free money, but giving you some active support, with an expectation that we will also pick up a significant international travel bill to try and get our innovators really understanding international markets. So that's the sort of landscape that we've got.
That's brilliant, George, because it provides a great segue into Julie's work with international trade. Before we come on to that, I would just encourage in the audience to use the chat function. If a question does occur to you throughout the discussion, if you throw it on the chat, then I'll try and integrate it if that works. It doesn't always work, but I'll try my best. Julie, so how do these opportunities convert to potential for international trade?
Thank you, Rob. Just to give you a little bit of background to our department. So the Department for International Trade is a UK government department formed around 4 years ago to replace UK TI. And it is we're based in Whitehall in London, and we have commercial officers in over 100 British embassies across the globe, all promoting trade and investment opportunities. So as has been mentioned, in 2017, the UK government published its industrial strategy, setting out 4 grand challenges to put the UK at the forefront of the industries of the future. And one of these grand challenges is, of course, the ageing society, where we aim to harness the power of innovation to help meet the needs of the ageing population. And of course, our mission is to ensure that people enjoy at least 5 extra healthy, independent years of life by 2035, which of course will be a challenge. But DIT is responsible for delivering the trade and investment opportunities of this ageing society grand challenge. And my role as a life sciences industry expert is to support companies who are innovating in this space. So we know that a girl born today in the UK has a 1 in 3 chance of living to 100, and this will double over the next 50 years. And these longer lives are opening up new opportunities as we live longer and perhaps work longer. But we know that healthy ageing is more than simply the promotion of good health or the prevention and treatment of ill health. It's about creating supportive products, services and environments that help maintain people's functional ability so that we can continue to be active and productive members of society. So we know there are sizable economic opportunities. For example, by 2025, the global connected health market will be worth over $200 billion US, with an annual growth rate of around 30%. And we have done quite a bit of activity around this industrial strategy, specifically on healthy ageing. For example, we have just opened the National Innovation Centre for Ageing in Newcastle, based at Newcastle University. And then, of course, there's the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund for Healthy Ageing, as George has spoken about. And then we've also launched a UK-Japan tech rocket ship, where we're looking at artificial intelligence and robotics to showcase a new generation of assisted living products. And then we have a number of local industrial strategies across UK regions, such as in Manchester, which has actually been designated as the UK's first World Health Organization age-friendly city. So companies are developing innovative products and services for the older population across many different sectors. And we are focused on supporting companies where we feel innovation can have the biggest impact for the ageing society. And this is a broad spectrum of innovations across prevention and diagnostics, advanced therapies such as cell and gene therapies, rehabilitation and medtech, digital technologies, mental health and well-being such as encouraging physical activity, dementia care, helping to ensure people can be more independent for longer, and age-friendly homes and communities, and also managing the common complaints of ageing, such as hearing loss or eyesight loss, to help people remain independent for longer. So we work closely with Invest NI in Northern Ireland to support local companies around accessing trade and investment opportunities in healthy ageing.
That's great, Judy. I just want to pick up some. So you mentioned that the Japan tech rocket ship. I mean, that sounds fascinating in itself. What a great name for an endeavour. But would that then suggest that perhaps the biggest market is Japan, given the large number of elderly?
Well, yes, Japan.
Is that something that innovators in Northern Ireland are looking towards?
Japan has a rapidly growing ageing population, as do many Western countries. I work very closely with our European colleagues. So yes, there are opportunities for companies innovating in this space in lots of different markets, but I would say especially the more Western type markets.
Okay, thanks, Julie. So I'm just going to shift attention back toward the specifically local research. And Stuart, I just want to ask, how is an ageing population and the needs of that ageing population shaped or is shaping academic research?
Thanks, Rob. I'll come to that in a moment, but maybe just to pick up just a slightly different point from Julie, which is that LIMICs are facing a slightly different problem with an ageing population, in that they have a very rapid growth of ageing individuals in their populations compared to Western countries, because we've had decades to kind of acclimatize to a growing ageing population, whereas the developing countries, as they rapidly improve, are seeing a very steep rise although it's from a lower baseline. So I think there are new challenges that are going to be around in less developed healthcare services in less developed countries to deal with that older population. But locally, nationally, you've heard a little bit about some of the national initiatives that are going on, and I think the last number of months have really brought the older population very much into a new and clearer perspective, and the discussions over the last few days at the parliamentary committee was really an admission that we'd not done very well in terms of how, as a nation, we managed the COVID pandemic at those early stages. And a big part of that was how we dealt with older people, and how it really, I think, turned over some stones in terms of the infrastructure that we have for the aging population in these islands and in many other developed countries. And I think this discussion is very timely because it really emphasizes the challenges that we've developed in terms of residential and nursing care that's largely in the private sector and become disconnected from the healthcare sector, which I think was part of the problem over the last number of months with care and residential homes. And I think this is an opportunity to reshape some of those societal positions and views, and at the same time start to harness the opportunities of digital technologies and just other ways of doing things. Some of the most important things we might do for the older population may be supported by digital technologies, but might actually be more around the values and the environments that we choose to look after and support older people during that later stage of their lives. From a research perspective, I just wanted to really make a couple of points. One is that we do have a very good resource across these islands in terms of longitudinal cohort studies in older people. There's the UK, the England longitudinal study, the Tilda study in Republic of Ireland, and the Nicholas study in Northern Ireland, all of which now have up to a decade or more of longitudinal data on aging populations at some scale. And there is quite a bit of data now coming out of those. And I think in terms of how we take the way we treat elderly people forward in our civic society, but also in how we deliver healthcare and support older people later in life. We have now a rich source of data, and I think cohorts on which it's now possible to do interventions and look for real improvements. And as Joann mentioned earlier, these are not going to be single interventions. They're not going to be just a new diagnostic or a new piece of med tech or a new drug, but they're going to be pathways and packages that will be used in a contextual situation. And I think those cohorts and the availability of much broader healthcare data will allow us to undertake real-world evidence studies in these individuals. And then just to bring it further back to Northern Ireland, as part of the Belfast Region City deal, we have 3 healthcare platforms coming into that deal. One is GII, which is a digital platform which will enable large population studies in Northern Ireland. Second is CDHT, which has been led by Jim McLaughlin from Ulster, and that will be developing med tech from a engineering and software perspective, many of which will be highly applicable to an older population. And thirdly, iReach, which is an institute for research excellence for advanced healthcare, which will be a complex clinical trials setup that will allow us to do and execute real-world evidence studies as part of its mission. It will also do early phase work to do the reductionist part with the med tech, the drugs, and the diagnostics, but with the vision and the aim to bring those rapidly from innovative development into real world evidence studies, because I think the conventional sort of phase 3 trial in this context is becoming increasingly redundant, because we need to develop multiple interventions, pathways of care that we can then look for the evidence of effectiveness so that they can be adopted by payers in healthcare systems across the world. So I think, just in summary, this has been a bad time for the older population, but is an opportunity to really rethink how we do this, how we value and care for the older population from a health and well-being perspective, and I think to use the opportunities that we've already talked about from the other speakers to bring together comprehensive packages that support people who are well in their older years, but also enable people who have long-term conditions, multimorbidities, to also still contribute to society through either work or culture, or just by being part of society and bringing those checks and balances that having a more mature and older population bring to a population. So I'll finish there and hand back to you, Rob.
Thanks, Stuart. That's really illuminating. Helen, from your perspective, I mean, there are a lot. You'll recognise a lot of the themes that Stuart picked up there from your own academic research, no doubt at all. What might be interesting is the perspective on how what we do in Northern Ireland perhaps differentiates ourselves in terms of the resources we have to study healthy ageing in more detail.
Yeah, thanks for that. Just to really add to what Stuart has been talking about, one of the resources that Stuart mentioned available to us, one that he didn't refer to, is a north-south study of ageing that has been ongoing, where we've using identical methodology and protocols in partnership. It's the TUDA study, standing for Trinity Ulster Department of Agriculture study. It's so named because it brings Trinity College Dublin together with ourselves at Ulster, but the original funding came from the Republic of Ireland Department of Agriculture. So I do think into the space we're talking about today, in terms of the health challenges in ageing, and indeed the translation of research that comes from healthy ageing, or the opportunities in the economic space, I think there's a lot to be said for collaborative north-south work, and the TUDA study has allowed us to really come to the healthy ageing table in attracting a lot of opportunity beyond what would be available to us in NI alone, but also with research that has wider translation in terms of, I suppose, while nutrition is a major focus of the TUDA study, it really is looking very much in a holistic way at ageing. We originally sampled 5,500 people north and south, but now have already sampled 1,000 of them 6 to 7 years after their original sampling, giving a great richness to the data. We've a lot of biomarker evidence, so we've now completed with successive funding, much of which has come from BBSRC schemes, and have often been in partnership with other European countries through the JPI Joint Programme Initiative. We've been able to enrich the original data set. So, for example, highly relevant currently, there's great interest in the relationship between nutrition and immunity in ageing, and thanks to funding from a JPI program, we've now characterized the whole original 5,500 samples and the follow-on samples from 20% of those were sampled more recently for immune factors. So we're looking at the relationship. There's much interest, for example, between diet and immune function, and the possibility that while we've no direct evidence that dietary factors could contribute to better immunity and thus protect older people, help boost the immune system in terms of the response to COVID and other infectious diseases. There's a huge amount of interest in that. So I think that, and indeed in the underpinning genetics. So whilst genetics have a huge role to play in terms of how people age, the diseases that they're likely to develop over time, it's very evident that just having genetic predisposition doesn't necessarily generate the disease, the phenotype for the disease, let alone the eventual disease. That it's very often the interplay between, yes, genetic predisposition, but certain dietary components that will interact with genes. So somebody may have, for example, a genetic factor that predisposes them to greater cardiovascular disease, but they may not develop the phenotypes that will in time cause them to develop the disease. In a healthier nutritional environment, that gene, that adverse phenotype determined by the genetic factor may be modifiable. So, for example, in recent years, we've been very interested in a genetic factor that is linked with higher blood pressure. Now, high blood pressure predisposes to stroke in older age, but also a higher risk of dementia. So there's great interest in nutritional factors that might give rise to healthier blood pressure over a lifetime. And the other big, I suppose, point that I'd like to make is that in terms of healthier aging, small changes, for example, that might help maintain brain function for longer might have huge impact in terms of, so if you can, for example, with interventions, delay the onset of dementia by 5 years in terms of societal benefit, that will be huge. So having healthier years for longer as opposed to just keeping people alive for longer. And that's where nutrition, together with other healthier environments, may really help in the prevention of diseases of aging, keeping people free of disease for longer rather than just adding more years on. And with huge economic benefits, obviously, because once older people start to manifest serious disease risk factors, that's when there are huge costs to the health services. So I suppose the whole focus of looking for ways, looking at the data sets that Stuart has referred to that are available to us, we're currently, for example, in a collaboration with Genomics Medicine Ireland, and we're getting whole genome sequencing done of our highly well characterised older people from Northern Ireland and the Republic, and that will really allow us to investigate the role of genetic factors in the development of future disease. So I think building upon the existing resources we have and looking for ways in which we can understand the factors that enable people, societal factors and indeed biological factors that can enable people to stay healthier for longer and disease-free for longer, and thus lead to better quality of life while people age, rather than simply just longer years of life.
Thanks, Helen. I think that's a great point. I mean, there's many factors involved in this, and the more we understand about them, the more that we can deliberately pursue those factors in order to keep people productive and healthy, and out of the burden of healthcare for longer. I suppose that kind of provokes a thought. There's a few things coming on the chat that I'll bring in a second, but the thought occurs to me, and I think picks up something that George, you mentioned about hitting this target in 2035, which is a fairly heroic target, and will rely on people investing in their own well-being, and part of that is the nutrition piece that Helen referred to. I'm interested to find out, has the last kind of 4 or 5 months of the COVID experience changed people's approach to taking ownership over their own well-being that might help us in this endeavour of keeping people healthy for longer. George, you raised the point initially, so I'll direct you.
You raised a really interesting point. What impact has it had? Two sort of reference points that I've got. One is Andrew Scott of the 100-Year Life, macroeconomics and demography, actually points out that the mortality curve by age of COVID matches more or less the population mortality. So COVID in the long term will have very little impact on our forecast life expectancy as a population. So that's one, and another which is a bit more anecdotal. I had a group of experts together in the last couple of weeks, telling us what they're seeing at the front line. They were actually seeing increased falls, accelerated cognitive decline, because older people in lockdown are not getting the exercise that they need to maintain their conditioning. So they're, exhibiting, I suppose, what the medics would call sarcopenia in their muscles, so they're losing strength and falling, coupled with something like nearly a 50% reduction in referrals into services in that age group, because people are scared to access healthcare and scared to have healthcare professionals enter their rooms. So it is going to have an impact. It may be transient, but I think it will imprint on people's minds actually what our older populations need, and probably particularly the value of actually arriving in later life in reasonable physical condition, and maintaining that. So I think it has been a wake-up call in some of the younger populations. But it'd be interesting to see. I mean, we had a new chief exec who said something when she arrived, which chimed with my own experience, that sitting on Zoom for 8 hours a day is much less active than moving from meeting room to meeting room. So it actually requires quite positive behaviour change. And I'm early days. I'm not sure we're there yet, but we've certainly sent a message into there is a message in the population that if we build on, there's potential for long-term benefit. Sorry, there's a bit of a long answer there, but
no, that's brilliant. If anybody else wants to come in on that one, I'd welcome other points of view on how COVID has affected our approach to looking after ourselves in older age.
Well, I think the notion that it's a good thing to put lots of vulnerable older people with comorbidity into contexts where you have really no control over transmission of infection is not a good idea, and I think should be a strong stimulus for us to think about how do we maintain supported living for older people, because this is not the last pandemic that will happen, and I think we don't need a study to tell us that it was not a good thing to be in a care home during this time, and we've got to look at other alternatives that support older people and help them stay connected, as George said earlier, to their communities and their societies and to their families, that doesn't make them vulnerable by putting them into residential homes and care homes.
Yeah, interesting.
I can come in there
sure.
to support that, Stuart. I suppose the crisis really has accelerated the adoption of a lot of especially digital technologies to help support older people through isolation, loneliness, and to help with managing efficiencies within care homes. So I guess, that accelerated adoption is a great benefit, of course, but it's a shame that we had to have a pandemic for that to happen.
Indeed.
There was one anecdotal piece, I guess, I'd like to bring in there, and there's a novel type of care home in Dover, near where I'm currently living, which is to try and develop co-living for people with dementia and to encourage them to be outside. And I reflected really that during those early days of lockdown, we all experienced what an elderly person experiences as they go into a care home, which is, I think the statistic is the person in a care home on average spends 90 seconds outside a week. And I think, you know, that accelerated effects on our well-being, and the fact that we're all potentially sitting on Zoom for 8 hours, struggling with technology, is potentially a taste of what, you know, some of our older population are going through in their normal life anyway. And then, you know, there's the disconnected nature. So I think if we can think about how we felt in those early days of lockdown and that insecurity, then that's a good reminder of what some of our elderly patients potentially are going through, and how might we wish to change that in the future and engage them more in their own care or in society or in their community.
Absolutely. Just referring to the chat here, and I may not be seeing all of it, but there certainly the discussion started around awareness of companies working in this area, so that academics might collaborate efficiently with them. And George, thank you for pointing Reinhold in the direction of Lorraine and the KTP network here in Northern Ireland. Certainly they can connect you in. I see David Branner on the call as well. The Connected Health Innovation Centre here in Northern Ireland has a good handle on the companies who have an interest in this area, and I'm sure David would be happy to connect anybody into the commercial network that might be open to collaboration. There's certainly funding available to do that, and it's an integral part of, as Stuart said, the city deals as well. I don't know, David, do you want to comment on that, just as a snapshot of the local industrial environment and commercial representation?
Yeah, just a comment there. I mean, in SHIC we have about 30 members, and that, you know, ranges all the way from you know, medical devices to reducing isolation in homes, and companies like Cradle, who we've had on HIRANI before, or on one of these calls before, and the products that they provide to you know, maintain that connectedness. And they're at an interesting point of you know, starting deploying their devices, and is actually then a rich source of data as to how that those interventions help, and how we can nudge people in the right direction. So yeah, as I say, there's a range of companies, and in SHIC we're keen to, you know, bring those companies together and introduce them to an academic research environment to potentially drive future developments and enhancements of their products. Thanks, David.
Sorry to pick on you, but I think it's important that people understand the fact that there are conduits to industry in Northern Ireland that should be very easily accessible, and there are other companies. Suresh mentions Rivana, active in ophthalmology, which is kind of a key consequence of aging. But there are other interesting companies in Northern Ireland working on other areas such as dementia, brainwave bank, trying to understand how to harness a surrogate for dementia, which is, you know, a huge problem that we're nowhere near addressing at the minute. So lots of challenges, lots of local activity. So we should have the basis for a really meaningful opportunity to impact on the area if we can bring this all together. I see David's thrown up his contact there, so please avail of that. George, you wanted to make a point?
Yeah, I just want to make the point that we are really keen on being UK wide and making sure that Northern Ireland gets its fair share of what we're doing. I personally, you know, visited actually all 3 devolved nations within the first sort of 8 weeks of taking over my role, and would be doing that again if I could. I mentioned investors before. One of the things that we were really pleased with is the investors that we have acquired. So Barclays Ventures, Legal & General and North Star are all operating outside the Golden Triangle of London, Oxford and Cambridge to make that available. I have to put my hand up and say that actually the results of what we've managed to appoint in Northern Ireland is not yet where I would like it to be. So I really encourage people to engage with those that I've talked about and think about the opportunities that we've got, because we do genuinely think that there's huge innovation. And Helene mentioned this sort of a Pan-Ireland study. I spent 3 years actually working in Dublin for the health service executive, know their system sort of well, and its issues well. But I think there's a huge amount of talent that is not yet being tapped, and we really would like to see that come forward and get funding.
Great, thanks, George. Another thing occurs to me, I'll come back to longevity dividend that we spoke about, and I'll kind of, I hesitate to go in this direction, but it's kind of the elephant in the room. I'm involved in the GP. It's not going to be people, and trying to understand where the jobs of the future may lie in order to have the right balance between quality jobs and the volume of jobs is going to be very challenging. If we throw into the longevity dividend and have more elderly citizens able to contribute economically, what do we imagine those elderly citizens might be doing? Now, that's an impossible question to answer, but I just wonder if there's anyone brave enough to try to approach that one in the first instance. I'll take that overwhelming silence as a no. It's
well.
Sorry, go on.
Actually, I'll step in. So sort of 6 months ago, before all the current stuff was happening, we'd have been talking about declining workforces, real issues for UK businesses in actually sustaining what they're trying to do. The result of actually the impacts of COVID immediately, the job losses that we're already seeing right across the UK, and bracing ourselves for a recession. Actually, one of the real issues is the return of ageism in employment, and actually seeing older people leave the workforce, probably not of their own volition, or it'll probably creep in a different way. It'll probably creep in not adapting your working practices to enable older people to participate, and it has the undesirable side effect of sending a lot of people into later life with insufficient financial resources, losing their social contacts and all the rest of it, and actually adding to years of poor health rather than addressing it. And at the same time, there's a generational fairness issue, which people like David Willits would talk about. So it's wrong for old people to, wrong in a sense. It would be unfortunate if older people simply sat in jobs that prevented young graduates and young people leaving school getting any form of employment and finding that after 5 years they face a lifetime of unemployment. So there's a balance, and so there isn't a straightforward answer. But I think we actually have to put that international opportunity lens on, and say, well, what can we do by being creative about creating markets and opportunities internationally, and at the same time we'll probably see more people enter a caring profession. And I personally hold real hope that care reform in its widest sense will improve the recognition, particularly for women, of their role as formal and informal carers, and more people will be attracted into that area, because there is going to be the need.
And that is, there are a couple of fantastic points in there that can form the basis of the whole hour's discussion, George. So thank you for bringing it. Stuart, did you want to? You've unmuted yourself there. Did you have a point to make before we?
I was just about to talk about that generational fairness issue, which particularly in the university sector is an issue in the US. One of the real challenges in the university sector is the longevity of senior academics, and that is really stopping them recruit junior academics within some of the systems, and has become a challenge for some of the very well-known universities in the US, and is bubbling along a little bit now in the UK, because again, academics can stay on for a long time. But I think the point I wanted to make was that with increasingly healthy older population, we must also empower them to self-mobilize and to be entrepreneurial and to contribute back to society in their latter years. I think there's a kind of notion that you retire and then you just go off and have fun. And I'm sure there should be a bit of that, but there's also I think an important notion that older people are still part of society, and in developing countries, older people remain, the keystones of society, and it's more of a kind of civic policy. But how do we empower and make it attractive for people who have perhaps finished a stage of their career in regular employment, but might have a very positive effect in terms of small enterprises, supporting the next generation. And I think we've lost that in a lot of Western communities of how to do that ongoing integration, and that hitting 65 isn't this massive watershed where you change your life completely, but that it's a continual transition with age that mobilizes your strengths back into societal benefit. I'm not sure there's products around that, but it might change a little bit how the older generation continues to contribute into those healthy 70s and maybe even 80s.
Thanks, Stuart. I think those are really important, quite profound considerations that we'll see evolve over time. But I think there are opportunities in there. I think we just have to think carefully about what they are and the talent that exists in all our populations to take our economy forward and benefit all. I'm going to have to wrap up there, folks. This has been a really interesting conversation. We could easily carry on for much longer. I'm gratified to see on the chat that Shannon O'Neill from the satellite catapult has indicated their interest in facilitating research in healthy aging. This is really important as we tie in all the elements of our research and innovation ecosystem, and it's really satisfying to see there's a discourse on the chat, exchanging email contacts. Please do follow up on these particular threads as you see it benefiting your own research, clinical or commercial interests, because this is why we have these discussions, open up these conduits to conversation and collaboration. So thank you very much for that involvement. Thank you very much to the panel. As ever, I appreciate your input. We couldn't do this without you, and it's been a really interesting conversation. A bit of a plug for the next one. Joann's taking the helm from now, as I said. We'll have a break for August as it's holiday season, and you all deserve a break. But I believe Joann will be running the next fireside chat on the subject of advanced therapies, so cell and gene therapy. Really, really important discussion as therapeutics evolve in concert with evolving technology. So that will be an interesting one. So keep your eyes open for alerts around that. But anyone who's joined us, thank you very much for your attention. Hope that was beneficial. Thanks again to the panel, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Rob. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Rob.